They say a prison takes your freedom, but nobody tells you the truth. Before they take your freedom, they take something far worse. They take your heart. For Marissa, that moment came at 4:17 a.m. Not when the battering ram struck her door. Not when the red dots of flashlights danced across her walls. Not even when the cuffs tightened around her wrists. No, the moment her life stopped was the moment she heard her daughter scream. A tiny, trembling cry that sliced through the room as an officer lifted the newborn out of her arms. Marissa didn't fight. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Her body simply turned to stone, while everything she loved was carried toward the hallway. Her daughter's cry echoed off the apartment walls, then down the stairwell, then outside, then vanished. That silence was worse than any prison cell she'd ever face. By sunrise, Marissa was in the back of a transport van, staring at her reflection in the dark window, pale, shaking, empty. Her milk had come in hours earlier. Pain pulsed through her chest, sharp and unfamiliar, triggered by a baby who was no longer there to feed. Every bump in the road vibrated through her body, shaking loose memories of 9 days she would never get back. Tiny fingers curling around hers, the warmth of soft skin, the soft breathing of a life that depended on her. When she finally arrived at the maximum security women's facility, nicknamed the Female ADX by inmates and officers alike, she stepped out with wrists bruised and a heart broken in ways no sentence could ever repair. People think prison takes your past. But Marissa was already learning the truth. Prison takes your future first. They say a mother never forgets the moment her life splits in two, the world before and the world after. For Marisol, that moment came in a blinding flash of red and blue lights. She was standing in the kitchen, humming to the rhythm of her baby's soft breathing, when the police pounded on the door so hard it rattled the walls. Her daughter, only 3 months old, jolted awake with a terrified cry. That sound, the crack in her baby's voice, would echo in Marisol's memory long after everything else faded. The detectives didn't wait. They stormed inside, shouting orders, knocking over toys, bottles, anything in their way. Her baby's blanket fell on the floor, getting crushed under a boot. Marisol tried to reach for her daughter, but cold metal cuffs locked around her wrists before she could even touch the crib. The neighbors watched from their porches like it was a TV show. Not one person looked at her as a mother, only as a headline waiting to happen. Inside the police car, Marisol pressed her forehead to the window, desperate to catch one last glimpse of her baby. She saw 2 social workers lift the child, swaddled and sobbing, into a government van. The look on her daughter's face, confusion, fear, reaching tiny hands for a mother who could no longer reach back, shattered her soul. The ride to the station felt like an endless tunnel with no air. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat hurt. She wasn't thinking about lawyers or charges or prison. She was thinking about one thing. Would her baby remember her? People imagine that the worst part of prison is the bars. But Marisol learned the truth that day. The real prison begins the moment they take your child away, and you can't do anything to stop it. Marisol thought jail would be loud, screaming inmates, clanging bars, echoing footsteps. But the first thing she noticed was the silence. A heavy, unnatural silence, like the world had stopped breathing. They took her jewelry, her shoelaces, even the tiny photo she carried in her pocket. The officer held it up, looked at it without emotion, and tossed it into an evidence bag. Marisol wanted to scream. That was the last picture taken of her holding her baby. The only proof that this nightmare had not always been her life. Inside the holding cell, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying bees. The concrete bench was ice cold, and the smell of bleach mixed with old fear. Women whispered in the corners, some angry, some numb, some already broken. But every whisper carried the same quiet question. How did it come to this? Marisol kept her eyes on the floor, afraid that if she made eye contact with anyone, the dam holding back her pain would burst. Her mind spun with images. Her daughter's tiny hands, the way she smiled in her sleep, the soft curls on her head. She clung to those memories like a life raft. Hours passed. Maybe minutes. Time stopped meaning anything. When an officer finally called her name, she stood up on shaking legs. Her wrists were cuffed again, tighter this time, like punishment. She followed the officer down a long hallway lined with bars and shadows. Every step echoed like a countdown. A guard opened a door and gestured inside without a word. Marisol stepped into a small room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a stack of papers that looked like her entire life rewritten by strangers. "Sit," the guard said. Marisol lowered herself slowly, bracing for the words that would change her fate. But nothing, not even the arrest, prepared her for what she was about to hear next. Marisol sat with her hands cuffed to the metal loop on the table, her pulse thudding loud enough to drown out the hum of the lights. The woman across from her, a court-appointed lawyer who looked more exhausted than invested, flipped through a folder thick with reports, photos, and statements Marisol had never seen. No one asked how she was holding up. No one asked about her daughter. "Marisol Rivera," the lawyer began, voice flat, "the state is charging you with felony possession, resisting arrest, and endangerment." Endangerment. The words sliced through her. Endangerment? She had been trying to protect her baby from the world, not place her in danger. But the papers on the table didn't care about her truth. They only cared about the version written down by men who would never know her. The lawyer continued, each sentence heavier than the last. "The prosecution is pushing for the maximum. They're using your past record, your associations." Associations. Another word twisted into a weapon. She had been in the wrong place, with the wrong person, on the wrong day. But that didn't matter here. Marisol felt the room getting smaller. The air tasted metallic. "My daughter," she whispered. "Where is she?" The lawyer paused, finally meeting her eyes. "Child Protective Services has taken custody. You won't be able to see her until after sentencing. Maybe longer." The floor disappeared beneath her. Marisol tried to breathe, but her lungs felt locked. She wanted to stand, to scream, to run to wherever they had taken her baby. But the cuffs dug into her skin, reminding her she belonged to the system now. Then came the final blow. "If the judge accepts the recommendation," the lawyer said softly, "you'll be transferred to ADX, the women's unit." The words echoed like a death sentence. ADX. A place where hope went to die. The transport van rattled like an old metal cage as it rolled through the Colorado desert, kicking up dust that swallowed the horizon. Marisol sat shackled at the wrists, ankles, and waist, a chain so tight she could barely lean forward. 2 armed officers sat across from her, silent, helmets down, faces unreadable. No one spoke during the 6-hour drive. No one needed to. The name of their destination said everything. ADX. The place inmates whispered about like a ghost story. The place built for those the system wanted forgotten. When the van finally slowed, Marisol lifted her eyes. A massive concrete fortress rose from the earth, surrounded by razor wire that glinted like broken glass under the midday sun. There were no windows, no courtyards, no sign of life, only gray walls and watchtowers that followed every movement. Her throat tightened. The gates opened with a hydraulic groan, swallowing the van. Inside, the world looked even colder. White floodlights washed every surface, erasing shadows, but somehow making the place feel darker. "Rivera, let's go," an officer barked. Marisol stepped out, her legs trembling from the restraints. The moment her feet touched the ground, a blast of cold mountain air slapped her face. It smelled of stone and steel, not a single hint of soil, trees, or anything alive. A female officer approached with a tablet. "Marisol Rivera, inmate number 41792, A classification, high risk. Housing, ADX Women's Security Unit." Her voice carried no emotion, as if she were reading from a grocery list. They led Marisol through a series of automatic doors, each one sealing shut behind her with a thud that echoed through her bones. Every sound felt final. Every step felt like sinking deeper into a place where time didn't pass, only stretched. Then she saw the hallway of solitary cells. One of them would be hers. One of them would be where she learned to live without her baby. Marisol's new world measured 7 feet wide and 12 feet long, a concrete rectangle sealed by a heavy steel door with a narrow slot for food. The walls were rough, the floor cold, and the air carried a faint chemical smell, like disinfectant that never faded. This was her universe now. The box, as inmates called it. Her bed was a thin mattress on a steel frame bolted to the ground. Her toilet, sink, and desk were molded from the same gray concrete, making it feel less like furniture and more like part of the prison skeleton. The tiny slit window near the ceiling let in a line of light, but never enough to know whether the sun was rising or setting. On her first night, Marisol sat on the bed, hugging her knees as a strange silence filled the space. No shouting, no footsteps, no voices. ADX wasn't loud like other prisons. Its cruelty was quieter. Isolation was the punishment. Meals came through the slot with a metallic clank. Sometimes it was oatmeal so thick she could flip the bowl upside down without spilling it. Other times it was a meat patty that tasted like warm rubber. But every meal came with the same whispered question in her mind. Is my baby okay? She pressed her palm to her belly, even though it was no longer swollen. She could still feel the ghost of her daughter there, like an ache carved into her ribs. When guards escorted her to the recreation cage, a small, fenced-in pen where she could see a scrap of sky, she heard the faint echo of another woman crying in a distant cell. The sound drifted like a warning. Here in ADX, everyone broke eventually. Marisol wondered how long she would last. How long before the walls felt closer. How long before the silence swallowed her. And worst of all, would she ever hear news of her daughter again? Days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Yet every morning, Marisol woke with the same tiny spark of hope. Maybe today would be the day a letter arrived. Maybe today someone would tell her where her daughter was. Maybe today she would finally hear her baby's name spoken out loud. In ADX, mail was slow. Sometimes it arrived months late. Sometimes it simply disappeared. But Marisol waited anyway. Every time the guard's footsteps echoed down the concrete hallway, her heartbeat quickened. She sat up straighter. She held her breath. She imagined the white envelope sliding through the slot, her mother's handwriting on the front. But every time, the guard stopped at someone else's door. And every time, he walked past hers without looking inside. One afternoon, after 36 days of silence, the guard paused. The keys jingled. Marisol's chest tightened. She stood, wiping her palms on her pants. For a moment, she felt alive. But instead of a letter, the guard dropped a notice on the floor. Mail withheld, under review. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. "Why?" she whispered. The guard didn't answer. He was already halfway down the hall. Back inside her cell, she sank to the floor, staring at the slip of paper. Someone had written to her. Someone had tried. Maybe it was her mother. Maybe a social worker. Maybe a stranger with information. But ADX had stopped it, controlled it, decided for her. The worst part wasn't the withholding. It was the not knowing. She leaned her head against the cold wall and closed her eyes. She tried to picture her daughter's face, but the memory was slipping, softening around the edges. She wasn't forgetting her baby, but she was losing the details. And in a place like ADX, losing memory was the first step to losing yourself. Lights out in ADX was supposed to mean silence, dead, heavy silence that sat on your chest like another layer of concrete. But on one winter night, as frost formed on the metal frame of her bed, Marisol heard something that froze her blood. A cry. Not a scream of pain. Not a shout from another inmate. Not the angry echo of a woman losing her mind. A baby's cry. Soft, distant, impossible. Marisol jolted upright, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. She pressed her ear against the steel door, trying to catch the sound again. There it was, faint, muffled, drifting through the ventilation system. A single cry, then another. Not loud enough to be real, but too clear to be imagined. She whispered, "No, no, please," because she knew what her mind was capable of after months of isolation, and she knew what her heart was desperate enough to create. But the sound continued. A tiny whimper, a breathless wail, a desperate call from something small, fragile, familiar. Her baby. Her arms ached. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she felt the weight of her daughter again, the warmth, the softness, the impossible hope she once held. She collapsed onto her knees, fists pressed against her mouth as tears spilled down her face. The cries grew louder inside her head, filling the cell like a haunting lullaby. "Please stop," she sobbed. "Please, please stop." But the prison didn't stop. ADX had a way of turning wounds into echoes. The guards walked the tier as if nothing was happening. The lights stayed dark. The concrete stayed cold. And the crying, real or imagined, wrapped around her like a ghost she couldn't shake. That night, Marisol understood something terrifying. ADX wasn't just breaking her body. It was learning how to speak in her daughter's voice. Days in ADX bled into each other, a gray haze of cold metal, echoing footsteps, and the hum of fluorescent lights. Marisol's heart had learned to beat quietly, to keep hope buried, yet she found herself reaching for the one thing that felt almost human: paper. Letters. But not just any letters. Letters she could never send. Letters to the daughter she had held for a moment, then lost to the system. Letters that would never reach the outside world, yet she poured her soul into each one. Every word was a heartbeat, every sentence a whisper of love, every page a lifeline to the part of her that still believed in life beyond the walls. Today, I washed my hair, and the water felt like it was trying to tell me something. I thought of you. I thought of the day you first opened your eyes. I thought of how I couldn't hold you, she wrote, tears smudging the ink. She folded each letter carefully, stacked them, and hid them beneath the thin mattress. They were invisible to the guards, but very real to her. She could imagine her daughter reading them, feeling her mother's heartbeat through the words. She could imagine that smile, the one she would never see, but would always remember. The letters became ritual. Morning light, pencil in hand, a deep inhale, and she wrote. Afternoon light, another page, another confession. Night fell, and she wrote under the dim glare of the overhead bulb, telling stories of what life might have been outside the walls. And yet, the letters were both blessing and curse. They reminded her of what she had lost, the baby taken, the life interrupted, the touch that was forbidden. They were proof that love existed even here, but proof also that the world she craved was unreachable. But for Marisol, writing was survival. Each letter she could never send was a rebellion, a declaration that ADX could take her body, her freedom, her child, but it could not take her heart. The days in ADX moved with the precision of a metronome, unforgiving, relentless. Marisol had learned to exist in the rhythm of footsteps, slamming doors, and the distant hum of the fluorescent lights. But even in the strictest silence, hope found a way to breathe. Hope came in small things. A kind word from another inmate, a shared look in the hallway, a song hummed quietly in the cafeteria. And most powerfully, hope lived in memory, the memory of her child, the warmth of holding, the soft breath against her cheek. She had survived because she had to, but she had also survived because she believed that love was bigger than the walls around her. Every day, she told herself that one day, somehow, life would reach through these bars. That one day, she would hold her daughter again. That one day, freedom would taste real, not like the gray trays or the bitter coffee, but like sunlight on her skin and the laughter of a child she could call her own. Marisol's final act of defiance was quiet, almost invisible. She began mentoring the younger mothers in the prison, teaching them to write letters, to hold memories, to preserve themselves in the face of a system designed to erase. She showed them that even in the harshest confinement, they could nurture love, patience, and resilience. The guards did not understand. They did not notice. But within the walls of ADX, something invisible grew stronger every day: humanity. Marisol realized that survival was no longer about just getting through the day. Survival was about keeping the heart alive, keeping love alive, even when the world tried to take it away. And as she lay on her bunk, the night quiet except for her own steady breath, she whispered a promise to her daughter. One day, we will be together. One day, you will know that love is stronger than any prison. Hope, she knew, was the one thing ADX could never take.